Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our tonight's webinar, Access for All in Florida State Parks. My name is Emma Olmos. I am Alafia Conservation Trust Conservation Events Coordinator. I'm joined by Leanne Darcy, Alafia Conservation Trust Outreach Coordinator, and Paula Rousseau, who is the Grants and Program Administrator for the Florida State Parks Foundation. As a bit of background on ACT's mission, it is our mission to protect the natural, scenic, historic, and recreational resources in and around North Central Florida. ACT protects land through acquisition, donation, and conservation easements in 16 counties. Tonight's presentation is a part of ACT's Keep Florida Wild virtual series. If you would like to support future environmental education programming like tonight's talk, a donation can be made by texting Florida Wild to 44321. We appreciate your support. A recording of tonight's webinar will be available online following the event on ACT's YouTube channel. And there will also be a Q&A section of this evening following tonight's presentation. And you can submit your questions at any time during the presentation through the chat or in the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen. And we will get to them at the end of the presentation. So now to introduce Paula, Paula, you can bring your video on when you're ready. Paula's family moved to Florida from Long Island, New York in 1956. Before the ages of air conditioning and when it wasn't uncommon to find a moccasin or rattlesnake cross your path, it was a much different Florida than the people know today. While she is not a native Floridian by birth, she thinks of herself as one by choice and believes that there's no better place to live then or now. Working now as the Grants and Program Administrator, Paula has been involved with the Florida State Parks Foundation almost since its inception in 1993 and has served many terms on the board of directors. She is passionate about protecting the environment and believes that no matter where you live or travel in Florida, there should be a Florida State Park nearby. Lands should be set aside and managed for preservation and for the benefit and enjoyment of Florida citizens and its many visitors. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Paula to share her screen and start her presentation about accessibility in our Florida State Parks.
Bear with me. Let's start again. How is that, Emma? Are you all seeing my screen?
Yep, that's perfect. And we can hear you crystal clear and you're all good to go.
Excellent, great. Well, I want to start out thanking Alafia Conservation Trust for inviting me to speak here tonight. I'm a big fan of the work that you all do in protecting our area's valuable and precious conservation lands. It's great to be part of that as a member of your organization too. So we've been supporting Florida's 175 state parks and trails since 1993. And I just would like to give you a little background on our organization. We incorporated as a 501c3 nonprofit, and originally we called ourselves Friends of Florida State Parks. We recently changed our name to Florida State Parks Foundation, so sometimes you might see information out there under Friends of Florida State Parks, but it's one in the same. We're a citizen support organization, which by Florida statute means that we're allowed to exist for the sole purpose of supporting the mission of the Florida Park Service, which that mission is to provide resource-based recreation while preserving, interpreting, and restoring natural and cultural resources. And I'm probably getting a spam call now. And as Emma mentioned, ACT's mission, it sounds like it's very similar. I wanted to focus or let you know about a person of the name Fran Manella. She was the first woman to serve as director of the Florida Park Service from 1989 to 2001. And then she went on to become the first woman director of the National Park Service. So she has some very impressive credentials behind her. And while she was the director of the Florida Park Service, it was her momentum that created the Florida State Parks Foundation, which is an organization that benefits the entire system of Florida State Parks. Many, about 85 or 86 of the individual Florida State Parks have CSOs, citizen support organizations, and they do some outstanding support of their individual state park. Our focus is, our efforts are similar, only we include the entire system of Florida State Parks. Some statistics and some of our programs and activities. One is advocacy and education. Most people, a lot of people I encounter don't know what state parks are in their area. Legislators don't often know that they have state parks in their area, in their districts. And so we help to bring that awareness in their forefront. And we compile some data, and every year at the beginning, around legislative session, we contact legislators, we invite them to state parks and to see what's being preserved there. And so the statewide data, this comes out every year. Little is it known that 4.4 billion direct impact to Florida's economy happened between 2020 and fiscal year 2020, 2021. The park system allows many jobs. Their existence is meaningful in the area of jobs supported. And in some rural areas of Florida, often especially up in the Panhandle area, a state park is, their economy is based around their state park. It's what brings people into their area and creates economic benefit. 29 million visitors to Florida State Parks and Trails this last fiscal year. So the system of Florida State Parks is very, very valuable to the well-being of Florida. This is recently Representative Umfroy of District 5. She visited Hugh Taylor Birch State Park down in Fort Lauderdale. There have been other legislator visits, and hopefully will take place soon, some more. And they'll remember when they see gopher tortoises and special trees and learn from the park management and park volunteers the value of what they're looking at, they tend to want to preserve it. Another one of our programs is Yellow Buses in State Parks. And we help fund children's field trip transportation to Florida State Parks. There has to be an educational component. So how that works is sometimes we have this on our website. A teacher or a summer camp entity like YMCA will see this opportunity. They send an email to me, and we are able to fund the bus transportation and transportation to their local Florida State Park. And as I say, there has to be an educational component to it, such as you see here, these kids are about to do some seining.
Hi, Paula.
Yes.
I think your screen didn't shift, so we can't see the buses right now.
Well, you wouldn't see any buses. You would just see some kids standing in line.
Oh, yep, got it now.
With some buckets. Okay. Yeah, well, we call it yellow buses because the tradition is that the kids go on field trips in school buses to Florida State Parks. We work in in hand with the Florida Park Service for Wildlife and Environmental Protection. Last year we were able to raise enough funds to plant 100,000 pine trees, longleaf pine trees in various parks around the state. We partnered with Bass Pro Cabela's to help John Pennycamp Coral Reef Park install a coral cam. And another example is some heavy equipment to create and maintain red cockaded woodpecker habitat at St. Sebastian River Preserve State Park. That was a special one that I was pleased to see happen. The undergrowth around old growth trees has to be removed and kept down for red cockaded woodpeckers to survive and thrive in those areas. Under history and culture, there is a state park called Fort Mose Historic State Park in St. Augustine. And they have what's called Flight to Freedom Trail. This park protects the site of the first free African-American site in Florida. So we helped fund some interpretive signage that tells the story of escaped slaves fleeing to Fort Mose for sanctuary. Culturally, down in the Fort Lauderdale area, there's a park now called Von D. Mizell and Eula Johnson State Park. Previously, it was called John U. Lloyd State Park, which was a white commissioner at the time sorry, my cat is decided to join this webinar. She may show her face in just a second. During segregation times, beaches were separated. White people had their beach and African Americans supposedly had theirs, but oftentimes there was no beach areas set aside for them. It was totally unequal. And Dr. Mizell and Mrs. Johnson advocated to have this beach site set aside and made available for African Americans. You can see in this picture, this historic picture, where they were on a Fort Lauderdale beach and the police officer is telling them they have to leave. But the Park Service wanted to be sure that now let's help try and rectify some of these things and show who actually had that beach park set aside and preserved. And then eventually, shortly after that, segregation was banned. And so thankfully, folks could go to whatever beach they'd like to go to. So now on to access for all in Florida state parks. And there's actually quite a bit of it. I have this wheelchair symbol up here, and I am going to mostly talk about wheelchair access, people who use mobility equipment. We do have helped out, funded some accessibility projects, but I happen to use a mobility scooter, and so it's the subject I'm most familiar with. A large project we just finished recently in 2021 was the construction of an all-accessible glass-bottom boat for Silver Spring State Park. And here shows you why people using mobility equipment could not get on board. And that's because the iconic glass-bottom tour boats at Silver Spring State Park were built in the 50s, the 60s, and a little bit into the 70s. And they were designed they're beautiful boats and they should be maintained and kept in operation as long as possible. But they were built before social awareness of accessibility. And you can see here that you have to step down into the hull of the boat. We wanted to change that. So we began design, and the boat is 12 feet wide, about 36 feet long, 35 feet long, and there's wheelchair spaces at the end of the viewing well, as well as alongside each side of the viewing well. And I'll show you a little bit more of that. This was the beginning of construction. This is the hull turned upside down. I learned that when you start constructing a boat, you start with the hull, so it makes sense, and it begins in an upside down position, and then they flip it. This is the boat being delivered, and that was a wonderful thing, interesting thing for me to see, and that this crane was able to pick it up, and then gently, like it was a baby sleeping in a cradle, they lifted it down and right into the water at Ray Wayside Park in Ocala. Oops. There's a film of that, but you can go back if you'd like to see it and view the program again. This is the boat in the Silver Springs Basin, and this is showing it in full construction. It has lithium batteries. We wanted to try and be as environmentally correct and friendly as possible. I know that there's lithium is by some people, they say it's not the best to use, but we felt that it was better than lead acid batteries. So the seats all along on the side here are, oh, excuse me, that they were there in the old boats, but in the new boat, there's just 4 lithium batteries powering this boat. In this picture, you can see that it now has an accessible flat deck, and you just roll on and off, and there's no more of a step down. I think this boat is a good example of universal design that works for everyone. This is me here on my red chariot, and we designed the boat so that if there are no passengers using mobility equipment, then these seats can fold down and flip up just like theater seats. And this way, the boat can be utilized by everyone. Also, the wheelchairs, there's a good deal of space here at the end. There's space along the side. And I like the integration part of it. Whereas if I were to come with a friend or family, they can sit alongside of me. I don't like the aspect, and most people with disabilities don't like, having to sit apart and away, which is the way it used to be. The way the idea of this boat got started to build this boat was I was at Paynes Prairie doing a disability awareness presentation there. I had a table and a woman in a wheelchair, in a manual wheelchair. Oh, this is awful. In a manual wheelchair, rolled over to my display table. I had a number of things I was showing people about accessibility in Florida state parks. And she said to me, I just took my grandkids over to Silver Spring State Park. I wanted to take them out and show them the river, and I couldn't go aboard. And so what's going to be done about that? I didn't get her contact information, but I do wish that I had, so that I could let her know that she can bring the kids now and they can sit right alongside of her. The name of the boat was inspired by, well, the existing boats there are mostly named after Seminole chiefs. And we discovered that there was one woman, Betty Mae Tiger Jumper, who was the first chief of the Seminole tribe of Florida. She is first and only so far. There has not been another. Her Indian name, Pataki, was given to her by her grandmother, and the name means soldier. And it must have been prophetic because she went on and became the first first Seminole to learn to read and write English. And she had a lot of drive behind her, and she brought that knowledge, or nursing knowledge and healthcare, to her tribal members. She was a great asset, and I wanted to point out why the boat was named that. So wheelchair accessible trams. This is a stock photo, and you can see that the ramp just folds down. It allows people to join, to be able to be transported and taken on tours around the parks. I know I've had my personal experience, and others have had also, where the family and friends are on the boat, on the tram, and the person in the powered mobility anyway is chasing behind them and catching up. So these electric trams that are wheelchair accessible, people don't have to do that anymore. I just heard today of someone who was able to, their 89-year-old mother was able to be transported over to the beach and then put in a beach wheelchair and taken out to be on the sand. It was a great thing. That's why we do these kinds of things. This is an adapted Handcycle for Alafia River State Park that we actually haven't purchased yet. We're working on raising the funds to get this. Alafia is known for its bicycle trails. And there are some individuals who go to the park, and at this time, only one of them owns and can transport their own Handcycle, their own adapted Handcycle. And also, this group is also trying to encourage others to come out, get active, and try out to find out what they can do, what they're capable of. These Handcycles are adapted to use with your hands to go around like a bicycle you put your feet on. And also there's adaptations they call quad hand grips. You can see that in this picture with this gentleman's hands are inside of a glove, which that glove is then attached to this bar. And since he can't grip the handlebars, he can still pedal or handle, or whatever the terminology would be there. So we're looking forward to getting one of these cycles into Alafia for use by people with mobility problems. Myakka River State Park. These are Trackchairs. This gentleman, his name is David Bottomley, and he and I went over to take some photographs and for him to go out on the trail. This is kind of like a tank, and it's operated with joystick controls, just like a power wheelchair is. And it really can go over some seriously difficult terrain, worse than this, more challenging terrain than is pictured here. But I wanted you to see how it's easily going over these routes. There are a number of manufacturers of Trackchairs, and I don't endorse anyone particularly over another. There are also powered wheelchairs, all-terrain wheelchairs. It's the same setup with the joystick control, but instead of having tracks, there are wheels with heavy tread on them. And those are very, very usable too. I've used these Trackchairs and they've gotten me in, and the wheeled powered chairs, and they've gotten me into some amazing places in trails in Florida state parks. This is beach and water access. This chair is a push type chair to get you out on the sand. It's got the big balloon tires, good for beach sand. Another example of that is the water wheels. This model has floats on the side so that when you go out into so that you can actually go out into the water and soak and be out there. It won't flip over. It's very stable. Whereas this one with regular armrests will definitely flip over very easily. Cabins and lodging. An example is, this is Myakka River State Park again. And these cabins were built by Civilian Conservation Corps. They're neat to be inside of and to see them. They're made out of palm logs. Accessible ramp up to the door. And this is just an example of the showing you what is available in most of the cabin lodging in the parks that I'm aware of. They provided toe and knee space under the sink for a wheelchair user, front controls on the stove. Very nicely accessible lavatory in the bathroom, roll-in shower. And again, another location that has very nice accessibility is Wakulla Springs State Park. They have the historic lodge there. It's very accessible. To some adaptations for people with hearing issues. This is a film that is shown at Springs Wildlife State Park. The original film was made before open captioning was put on these sorts of things. And so we were able to take that and get open captioning put on it. A lot of work needs to be done with some of the films that are going on in the state parks, sort of retro open captioning them, but it's a work in progress, as everything is. Nothing's perfect. Nothing works for everybody all the time. So if you're want to peruse if you're wondering how do you find out what's accessible in what park, you can go to the Florida State Parks website and then you go to Find a Park, click on Find a Park, which will show you then experiences and amenities. And you can peruse the list of things. Sometimes it'll be specific, that listed as accessible amenities. But sometimes you just go through and you're interested in staying in a cabin, you check that out and it'll usually tell you specifically what's accessible, what number cabin is accessible. There's a wealth of information there. We're grateful for our members and funding partners. You can go to our website and go to this particular page, and you can see the various people who have partnered with us on all kinds of projects around the state. This is me on a track chair at Jonathan Dickinson State Park. And these are my great niece. This is my great niece and my great nephews. And we went out on the Kitching Creek Trail, which was parts of it was extremely sandy and other parts were underwater. And the track chair went through it beautifully, no problems. And what I wanted to say with this slide is that, the Americans with Disabilities Act, how important civil rights laws are. The Americans with Disabilities Act is not a building code, it's a civil rights law. And I would not have had that experience and so many others, and be able to enjoy the vast accessibility that's going on, not just in state parks, but in built communities in all kinds of settings. Had it not been for the Americans with Disabilities Act, I think that's the best thing that's happened so far to people with disabilities. This is my contact information. I know I'm way early on this presentation. It did not go as long as I thought it would, even with wrestling with the cat and listening to the phone ring. I do apologize for that.
That is no problem.
How short am I, Emma? Should I go back and try and
No, absolutely not. We can just move right into the Q&A. I mean, listen, we've all got stuff to do later today, so we can just move into the Q&A section. I've got a couple questions, and remember, everybody that is on the Zoom right now, submit your questions as it keeps going, and we'll try and get to all of them. One of the first questions is how can Florida State Parks, how does Florida State Parks and how can Florida State Parks, as well as other park systems, including ours, better address some of the invisible disabilities that we also have in our populations, such as depression and chronic pain and things like that?
Well, that's a really good question. And it brings up another question is where do you draw the line? My personal philosophy is that the person with the disability has a responsibility to know what they need and be able to communicate it, to know what their limitations and capabilities are. So it's difficult. As I say, my focus is mostly on mobility accessibility and not so much some cognitive or mental health issues. But to me, that would be on a case-by-case basis. And my first question to that individual would be, how can we help you experience our natural areas? What can we do?
Yeah, and I wonder, is there maybe a baseline on, and I think probably for both mobility and then other different types of disabilities, is there a baseline of information that maybe you feel like, or the Florida State Parks tries to strive for, of even just like giving information on like web platforms and things like that, so that people can access accessibility information without feeling like they're needing to take extra steps? Like, how can we as park organizations make that information as accessible so that we are at least providing that information up front? Like, what kinds of things should our park systems and our different preserves be very upfront with information wise?
Well, one thing that the Florida Park Service does is that they do put on their website participation requirements, that you need to be able to traverse a certain distance. You need to be able to be in outdoor conditions, heat, possibly rain. You can list the kinds of things like that so people can know what to expect. If you're having an event or an outing in one of your natural areas, you can describe to them what this ground surface might be like. Just lots of warnings. I think the most important thing there, if I were looking and potentially considering joining an outing, is I would like to be seeing that if you have any questions or concerns, contact us. We'll be happy to talk to you about it. I used to give accessibility presentations to local businesses down in Palm Beach County. And one thing I would always tell them is to know your property. And so it's kind of like that. Know your trail, know your building, so that if someone asks you a question, you can intelligently answer it. I've had many encounters where they'll say yes, they'll with adamantly assure me that something is accessible, no problem. And when I get there, it is not.
Right.
Seriously not, like with curbs or steps or something like that. So know your property and be very willing to want to communicate that.
Right, absolutely. And for maybe, I think I'm going to kind of combine these questions, but for both organizations and then also people in the community who want to be advocating for more accessibility in our parks, what kinds of questions should we be asking ourselves, or should community members be asking their organizations, and what kinds of ways can we push this this need forward as we're kind of having these discussions as a community and as organizations? What are our first steps?
First steps. Well, this is one first step you're taking is to, with my presentation and the one you did previously to that on inclusion, is, to me, you doing this indicates to me that you care. You care about whether people with disabilities can access your programs and your sites and your activities. Communication, if you don't have an accessible website, and I know that the Florida State Parks Foundation does not have one yet, but we are in the process of making our website officially accessible. But considering doing that, and then just information, continuing to, in all your communications, let people know that you strive for accessibility and full inclusion, and contact us for any questions.
I have a question, which is, how is the Florida Parks Foundation making their website accessible?
Well, it's done by companies that do this sort of. And what will happen, and I'm not fully versed in it, but what will happen is a person with a visual impairment will be able to hover their cursor over various spots of the website, and they will have a screen reader on their device, and it will read out what they're looking at. It's not perfect, because sometimes the screen reader doesn't recognize and interpret, but it is helpful most of the time.
Absolutely. And then as long as nobody else has any more questions, I think we'll close off with this one, which is, what is a common misconception that you feel or have interacted with about people with disabilities in parks and preserves, and how would you like to address that, both in your work and then also just to the community through communications?
The common misconception, I think, is that people think that there's nothing that they can do there. There's no adaptations or accessibility measures made. There's, I think, fear in even attempting to join, and that goes back to my urging you to communicate that you are welcoming all people to your programs and activities. Because if I see something, for example, myself, that, I might like to join that walk, but I don't really know anything about it. I don't know where it is. I've never been there. Knowing that I can get lots more information about it will be very, very helpful. And hearing a friendly response to my inquiry, a welcoming response, will be very, very important.
Right. Actually, we did just get another question, which is what is the annual budget for the Florida park system and how is it funded? This person got in a little late, so they were wondering if that has been covered already.
Well, I can tell you that the exact budget I do not know. The current exact budget I do not know. I believe the legislature allotted $50 million in the 2019-2020 budget, but I'm not exactly sure. I know that Governor DeSantis has proposed $51 million for this year. Whether or not that will be approved, we don't know. How it's funded is through dock stamps. Every time someone buys a piece of property, they pay dock stamp fees. That pot of money is used by a lot of different entities, housing and social services, many other things. The Florida Park Service is funded through that and through operating fees. So cabin rental, camping, boat tours. And if I could just go back, Emma, and I do apologize to everyone for the distractions. Put me off track. I focused on this glass bottom boat for Silver Spring State Park, but many of other parks have tour boats, and all that I know of are accessible. Down in the Keys, Penny Camp has a glass bottom boat that you go out into the ocean over the coral reef. The things that I showed and the parks that I mentioned are samples and examples of the accessibility you can find throughout.
Yes, absolutely. And we also got another question that popped up, which is, could you explain how the CSOs of the Florida State Parks role, how they role and play?
How they do what?
I think it's what role they play, the
What
CSOs.
role they play?
Yeah.
Well, really, their role is to raise money. Their role is to help raise money to supplement shortfalls of the Park Service's annual budget. But more than that, they provide volunteers that do invasive species removal, mow the lawns. There are volunteers that clean the cabins, get them ready for the next visitor. Volunteers that man the ranger station and take money to come into the park, the entrance fee. Really, and they also become very creative in the events, Halloween events, Christmas events, and many educational things. They'll put together programs that teach about either about conservation of the environment or historical, like many of the parks are Fort Parks, Fort Mose, and they have relationships with the local schools, and where fourth graders, for example, have Florida history, and many of the parks organize tours for them for educational tours for the kids to come in and learn in conjunction with the school system's learning curriculum.
Oh yeah, I remember doing Florida history in fourth grade here. So, and I think we went to St. Augustine and I did some stuff at Florida parks there. So absolutely. Yeah. Okay, well, if there are no more questions, I'll give it a couple seconds and see if anybody's trying to get a last minute question in. But other than that, we had a brief webinar, which is great. And thank you so much, Paula, for joining us tonight and speaking on this. And I'm very excited for ACT to continue doing work on accessibility and making sure our parks and preserves are accessible to everybody. And I look forward to continuing to do work with you as well. So thanks so much, and everybody else have a great night. Bye.
Good night.